Good evening. My name is Rachel Corbin. For my English 102 speech, today I will be talking about how nurse-to-patient ratios and scheduling impact patient safety. In my PowerPoint, I have added a video. It's a cartoon demonstration of a patient falling out of bed. The elderly man has pushed the call button. His cries have been unanswered. The nurse on duty taking care of him has 6 other patients that she needs to tend to. The man slips and falls out of bed, hits his bottom to the floor. That's best case scenario. Sometimes a patient can fall head first, arm first, hip first. There can be brain damage, broken bones, or disastrous results if a patient has had a fresh hip or knee replacement. There's a certain amount of time that they cannot get out of bed, especially unattended, after such a surgery. This matters because that patient, that man, be it he the cartoon for this exercise and illustration purposes, could be your grandfather, could be your father, could be your husband. And because of an overworked and exhausted nurse, more time, money, and healing is going to need to take place to him to get back to status quo. So today we're going to be talking about the different ways that patient to nurse ratios, and the scheduling of a nurse impacts the patient. You think, why does this matter to me? I'm not a nurse. When someone is taking care of your family member, these are the questions that you should be wondering. How long has this nurse been working today? How many patients does this nurse take care of? How many days has this nurse worked this week? Patient to nurse ratios vary depending on the different unit that the patient is admitted to. Gives the answer to how many patients that nurse will take care of. Many times an ICU, an intensive care unit, will have 2 patients to 1 nurse. A medical surgical floor, much like the patient that fell out of bed in the beginning of the speech, could be upwards of 7 to 8 patients per 1 nurse. Pediatrics, psychiatry, and mother-baby tend to run roughly 4 patients to 1 nurse. That's best case scenario. ICU patients require the highest level of care in a hospital setting, usually, unless there's a transplant unit or something more serious. 2 patients to 1 nurse gives the nurse a chance to focus his or her energy into the patients that need the most attention. When the staffing ratios are not kept at a safe level, patient care is affected. The patient just had an open heart procedure, a bypass of his arteries, and a nurse is given a 3rd patient and breaks the patient-nurse ratio, that could have long-lasting effects, be it the patient starts to crash and the nurse doesn't know because she's not aware due to the fact that her time is split between 2 other patients besides that one. Oftentimes, it's a matter of staffing. There's a call out. Nurses do what they have to do. They kind of turn into MacGyver. Patients need to be cared for. There's not enough nurses, they make it work. Some states, like California, has enacted laws stating that there cannot be too many patients per nurse as instructed by their guidelines in their state. The scheduling of a nurse. When nursing began, Florence Nightingale days, and around the same time as that for the next several decades, nurses worked 8-hour shifts. Tended to be 7 to 3, 3 to 11, 11 to 7. A full-time nurse would be expected to come for 5 shifts per week with an 8-hour shift. This creates a nurse to be at the hospital or nursing home more often, more days of the week. In recent decades, late 90s, early 2000s, 12-hour shifts became a popular option for nurses from hospital administration. They found that with 12-hour shifts, the nurses were giving fewer reports per day. If a patient has one nurse for 8-hour shifts, there's 3 sets of report given at 3 o'clock, at 11 o'clock, again at 7 o'clock. The hospital administration wanted to find a way to save money by having less overlap. Nurses also decided that they wanted more days off. If you work 3 12-hour shifts, that's full-time status, and you have 4 days off. Now, nurses are very happy with their 4 days off, and having worked shift work at a hospital, it makes it very convenient, I know, for planning a vacation. However, 12-hour shifts leave nurses exhausted. They leave them drained, more likely to fall asleep at work. More mistakes are made due to lack of alertness, showing after 8.5 hours of work, their clinical skills are less effective. Safety. All of this transpires to low safety and low patient satisfaction, because a safe patient is a satisfied patient. Medicine errors, wrong medicine, wrong patient, wrong dose, happen more frequently on 12-hour shifts and with nurses with more patients than they can care for. Falls, like the one in the beginning of the video of the speech, because of unanswered call bells due to nurses being ineffective after a certain amount of time on long shifts, as well as exhaustion from working a long shift, as well as having more patients than they can care for successfully, the patient ratios. Hospitals that have more of these events happen, often called sentinel events by the Joint Commission, which the Joint Commission is a company that the hospital pays to come in and monitor how safe and accurate everything in the hospital is. They want to know that they're going to get their reimbursements from the insurance companies, mostly Medicare, because when the Medicare finds that your hospital is not safe, they don't want to pay. That affects everything. That affects pay for everyone and how well the hospital is doing. If a hospital doesn't do well, they close. A lot of jobs go right down the tubes. Sentinel events are also found more often with around 12-hour shifts. Sentinel event is a death or a physical maiming of an arm or a leg, or left in another physical way than they came in, either at the hospital or within, I believe it's a week or 30 days of discharge. Oftentimes, unfortunately, nursing is right in the forefront of why these sentinel events happen. Overworked, underpaid, and incorrect nursing ratios. Mandated overtime also doesn't help combat the exhaustion and the abilities clinically of a nurse that has worked too many hours. If there's a call out, staffing issue, then a nurse needs to stay. So not only are you talking about a nurse working more than 8 hours, you're talking about a nurse working more than 12. That is just going to lead to deadly outcomes. In conclusion, there are many things that we can thank nurses for. Nurses are on the front line of the care of the patients, keeping them safe, spending the time with them, 8-hour shifts don't necessarily keep them in the room as much as a 12-hour shift does, but it keeps them awake, alert, on their best clinical nursing behavior when they have enough sleep, when they aren't run over with poor schedules. Ratios also should be mandated in all 50 states. If not government-wise through the country, but at least states need to come up with their own ratios to keep patients safe. ICU nurses should not be having 3 and 4 patients. Medical surgical patients should not have 10 other patients to fight for the attention and care of one nurse. It burns nurses out, creates for them to quit, and that's high turnover. Again, forcing nurses to come up and fill in the gaps with overtime, all in 12-hour shifts, turning into 16-hour shifts, the vicious cycle. Mandatory overtime to fill those holes, they needs to be monitored as well. An exhausted nurse is not a good nurse, and every nurse that gets into this profession wants to do the best that he or she can do. I'd like to thank you for listening to the plight of a future nurse, and hopefully one that is not overworked and has appropriate ratios in her setting wherever I may land. Any questions? Thank you.